Okay. Simon.
5, 4, 3.
You're right.
Okay, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Simon Jacobson. I welcome you all. To another episode of Wednesday Night Live. And I also welcome the web audience as well. So you don't have to feel self-conscious because the camera's only on me. It's not panning actually around. So you can sit here without any inhibitions and react the most natural way possible. Okay. Around 6 years ago, a couple came to see me in my office, and they had been coming to my class, my Wednesday night class, actually separately before they had met. And then later together, when they decided to get married. And actually, an interesting thing, I mean, maybe somewhat of a commercial for this class, but it's a little twist, an interesting twist. This fellow had brought her on a date, they were on a date, and he decided to bring her part of the date to my class. And he told me afterwards that this is a great class to bring a date to because it's definitely going to provoke some reaction, and you can find out about somebody very quickly. If they absolutely have no reaction, that also is a statement. So, then I heard it from several other people, so this is just as an aside. If you ever have a doubt about the guy or the girl you're dating, bring them here and see what happens. You don't have to tell me what the results are. Anyway, but they came to me, and this was their dilemma, a common dilemma, which is that they were married then for 3 years, and they didn't seem to be able to maintain any called domestic tranquility. And they were fighting all the time. And how these things begin slowly, and then they begin to eat away at you. And they were saying that really, even though they felt they still had feelings for each other, they didn't forget their initial honeymoon and romance, but they didn't seem to be able to work it out. And as things got worse, they each began to question whether the other person was really their partner. They're at the point where they tried different therapy, marital therapy, and other forms, alternative methods, and so on. And they really were ready to make the decision, mutual decision to divorce. And they both were young, and they felt they had a bright future ahead of them. And since they, in a way, one of them at least started their journey through my class, they respected me. So they felt that before they really make the decision, maybe I have something to say, something I could share with them that maybe be helpful. They didn't want to leave any stone unturned, so to speak. So I was sitting with them. You never know in these situations, I just speak in a very general sense of the word, whether two people are really meant for each other and they just don't have the tools, or they're not meant for each other. And how do you really determine a thing like this? So sometimes you can go by instinct. Others have what they call Ruach HaKodesh. They have the ability to see, I guess it's not a crystal ball thing, and people will be able to see the spiritual destiny of things. But as they say in that world of the masters of Ruach HaKodesh, those who are able to see things like that those that know don't say, and those that say don't know. They say that about Kabbalah, about all the deep secrets. So people who advertise or who make it too public that they have that ability don't usually invoke it. So, as I was sitting with them, I was just asking different questions. And what did become apparent, sometimes you ask the right question and you hear a reaction. And I had an instinct that it was the former situation, that they were meant for each other, but they didn't really have the tools. Not that I could guarantee it, and I wasn't even ready to share that with them, but it was what I felt inside. So I said to them, exploring some further issues, I said to them certain things which I'm going to share with you tonight that provoked them to think a little about what their standards were, about relationships in general. And since they were both sincere, which is of course a critical element, unfortunately, most situations when you counsel couples or individuals, the problem is that the people are their own worst enemy. Meaning that even if people want to solve their issues and problems, but there are too many blocks, they can't even look at themselves in an open way. And they're always blaming others. Here, what was healthy, that was a very good sign from my point of view, was not that they had their problems resolved, but they weren't blaming each other. He wasn't like saying she's the problem, and she wasn't saying he's the problem. Which is a very good sign. Usually, both people do that. At least one. To get the situation where no one's doing that is always a very good sign. Because at least you can go further and explore and see how far you can go. So recognizing that, and that may have been also an element of my own judgment call, I decided to push it further. Since they didn't have that issue of blaming and accusing and the insecurity that comes with it, that they truly, sincerely were looking for the truth and what is right. So we began to explore it, and I met with them several times, and an interesting thing happened. This, as I said, around 6 years ago. The interesting that happened was they began a new journey with each other that came through crisis and difficulty. Today, they are not only happily married, but they already have teenage children. At that point, they didn't even have children. They weren't even thinking. They were afraid to have children. And above all, they are a real paragon, a model for a loving couple. So if you would meet them today, you would never know that they went through anything like this. Not that they're ashamed to share it. They talk about it when necessary. And today they are true soulmates. And it's very obvious to anyone that sees them, anyone that enters their home. And they've dramatically changed. So of course to me this was a very, I'm telling you a success story. There are many other types of stories. So when you look at a success one, which aren't always so common, you try to study the dynamics of what happened here. And what they actually told me, which I understood as well, was that when they met, they didn't even know what the word soulmate was. And when they were about to break up, they thought that this was not their soulmate. And they came to discover they were truly soulmates, which is when they obviously were able to work through all their issues and problems. I tell the story because it's a real life story, and as I said, I'll share different aspects of it as we go along, and I thought it's a good way to begin with a case study, so to speak. All of you here are old enough to have probably dated once in your life or more, right? So, I'm sure some of you probably dated more than once. You met more than one person in your life. Everyone has their own story. Some of you may have met someone that you thought was the right person for you, and then in time you figured out it wasn't. Some of you may never have met that. Everyone's got their saga. I'm sure some have been deeply hurt, and some maybe have not been so hurt. I'm sure some of you have also lost trust, or even faith or hope that you could probably find somebody. Once you're hurt enough times, you don't want to be vulnerable again. These are obviously generic statements, and I can't really apply it to any individual here. I'm just using my own experience and knowledge to define and see, I'd rather express different scenarios that are possible in the spectrum of human relationships. But the question is it possible that you may have met your soulmate and you did not know it, and you may still not know it? Now that's a very heavy question. Nobody likes to really talk about. Because if that's the case, then the question is, what's wrong with us that we couldn't recognize something that was meant to be? Now, I'm not trying to throw doubts into your mind. I'm sure you have enough of your own. You don't need mine to add to the equation. But in the context of relationship, it's important to know these things, because if you're not ready to look at yourself soberly and brutally even, and I don't mean to beat yourself up, I mean it in a healthy way, a secure way. Really, that is the death knell of any future. If a person is unable to look at themselves in a serious way and even with a critical way, again, not through self-annihilation, that is to me the worst scenario of all. Because then, what are you working with? You don't have anything to work with. And unfortunately, part of the so-called consequences or symptoms of failed relationships is that it begins to erode your own self-confidence, and as a result, self-questioning yourself, second-guessing, and that ultimately creates an environment in your own life that's sometimes difficult to look at yourself entirely. Easier to point at others, or blame parents, or blame God, or always above all to blame the other person. And finally, of course, there's I don't know if it's last resort, but many people come to the conclusion, or they feel they come to the conclusion, that there's an evil spell on them, an ayin hara. Because they've tried everything, and if it's not working, there must be some type of spell. You know what an ayin hara is? How do you translate that? Evil eye, curse. And I heard this from enough people to know there's not an exception, that people feel that way. And I mean, just for the record, the true people understand what an ayin hara will tell you, that an ayin hara can only affect those that believe in it. I don't know if you ever heard that. Because this is very much about the power that we have within our souls, and that really no one has power over you. So when anyone tells me that it's a curse or a spell or something like that, the first question I ask is, how do you know that? Because I've tried everything. But who decided you tried everything? You decided you tried everything. It's a very subjective statement to say, I've tried everything. You have to have someone objective whether you actually tried everything. And when I say everything, it doesn't mean going to the farthest extreme. So, to really answer this question, the questions I posed here, and many others, which, and I said, affects all of us, because there's no one on earth, and therefore no one in this room, that is immune to the need for love. We both need love, and we both need to love. It's inherent part of human personality. Do some people have maybe cut off that part of themselves because they've been hurt or because they're afraid? That's possible. Listen, you could also shut your eyes and keep your eyes shut for 10 years. Doesn't mean that it's healthy. Many of us maybe don't allow our own faculties to be functioning to the fullest for whatever reason. But the natural human being, a child, from birth, and that's when you know it's inherent, needs to be loved and needs to love. What the word love is of course a big word, the mysterious word called love. But it's definitely part of who we are. Whether it's a combination of companionship, intimacy, sexuality, validation, the list goes on. It's probably all that and more. And of course, it's something that always remains somewhat mysterious because the fact is no one has ever mastered it. As many books as you may have read about it, I mean, as they say, the more bestsellers there are about love, the more the sign is that's not working. Because if it was, well, you need another book. So clearly it's something like that elusive search for so many other things that are elusive. And not to suggest that the books that are out there and different so-called how-to manuals and workshops don't have insights. Many of them do. But overall, we definitely live in a world where there's a lot of crisis in this area. So even in all ages, in all generations, it was always a challenge. The Talmud says, after all, which I know is one of the favorite lines from many of the singles in the Mecca of single life in New York, called the Talmud, that says that finding a shidduch, finding your match, is like as difficult as parting the sea. I'm sure you've heard that statement. And you've never heard that statement? Okay. Well, if you haven't heard it, some people will tell you they know it from experience, not necessarily you need to know from the Talmud. So this is in all times, especially in a time like ours, which has definitely more challenges than others, especially in this area of intimacy and love and relationships. It becomes even more elusive, more difficult. So, though I can hardly say that I can be exhaustive in one evening, what I'll try to do, as I promised, is to have a blunt discussion on this topic. When I say blunt, I don't mean necessarily sacrilegious or inappropriate, but blunt as in talking about things about looking at ourselves maybe in new ways, in ways that are sometimes not so comfortable. So in that context, I want to begin, the reason I chose to discuss this week was because this week's chapter actually talks about the first shidduch in the making. We have already Adam and Eve, of course, are the first couple in the Torah. And then you have other couples that are mentioned, including Abraham and Sarah. But in this chapter you have the first courtship, so to speak, the first dating process, where after Sarah dies, the wife of Abraham, so Abraham, as a dutiful father, sends a servant to go find the appropriate shidduch, appropriate match, soulmate for his son Isaac. And he sends Eliezer back to his homeland, back to the home of Abraham, where Abraham originated from, which is something like southeastern Iraq today. That's more or less the area where Abraham began, in Ur-Kasdim, which is before he took his trip northwest to Israel. And the story continues in this chapter in detail. Eliezer negotiates and explores and discovers Rivka, who would become the appropriate shidduch. And then Rivka comes back with him, and when they first meet, Isaac and Rebekah, there's a certain, only one or two verses, a few verses actually, that are, if you read them on the surface, seem a little cryptic, but if you read them a little deeper, you find many secrets to the secret of a relationship that are as relevant today as it was then, and quite contemporary as well. So to really address this, as I said, this is the reason I chose to talk about it this week, because what better model do we have than the first model that the Torah itself gives? And if that model can be analyzed, we have for ourselves a model, a blueprint for our own lives. Not necessarily the first place most people would look to go back to the Bible over 3,000 years ago. You could say different times and different geography and different standards and different cultures. How can we learn from that about how to find your soulmate today in the 21st century in New York City or wherever a person finds himself? But as you'll see, the key thing to realize that the Torah is not a timely book. It's a timeless one. Anything timeless is also timely in the sense, I said timely because the New York Times of yesterday or 2 days ago is almost worthless the next day. But there are wisdoms and knowledge that is timeless and timely at the same time, meaning that any given time in your life or in history, you can find personal relevance, which has always been the ongoing theme of this class in the first place, which is that find the relevant message to our particular lives. So I thought it's appropriate to really look into this story in this episode and see what we can glean from it. So I remember giving a course in New York here, in the Learning Annex. It was on relationships. I think they titled it Love Forever After. So I have no idea who I'm going to be speaking for, but then when we met, I saw it was like a group around 50 people, men and women. Mostly, I would say many Jews. Everyone was secular. And I decided just to turn it into a discussion more than to just a monologue. I asked the following question, and the question was, how many of you believe in love forever after? That concept. Love forever after. Should we do it here too? Why not? By raising of hand, how many of you sincerely believe in love forever after? And don't be ashamed if you don't raise your hand. Okay. I don't know if that's a scientific study, because what does it say if you don't believe in it? I don't want to be judged, but there in that room, I must say, 49 out of 50 people did not raise their hand. Only one woman raised her hand, I think she was the youngest in the group, and everyone else chuckled, so to speak, when she did. And when I asked them, so why don't you? So one guy got up and said, very simple. I mean, he put it. He was going to say. He said actually he took out of my mouth what I was going to say, so I didn't have to repeat it. He said, "Look, everything in this life, in this earth, erodes. Everything is mortal. The food we eat, the money we make, our age, our looks, our skin, everything about us ages. And the same thing is in the general universe. Everything is constant flux. We live in a transient world. So why, suddenly, out of the blue, one thing in life should be forever, called love?" That's the way he put it. I mean, I embellished a little for emphasis. So I said, so what do you think about this woman that raised her hand? He says, she probably wasn't in any serious relationship yet. That's the way he put it. So she hasn't been disappointed. In other words, basically, they all acknowledged that there was a time they did believe in it. And then they lost the faith due to their personal experiences. And the way he put it is actually a very good argument. That I'm not going to ask you all that raise your hands how you can believe in it when everything around you is constantly changing. So why suddenly would love be something that doesn't change? And let's be more specific. You fall in love with someone. You hear this all the time. I fell in love. Love at first sight. You see people who, and they are sincere about it. 2-3 years later, they may not even know each other. 2-3 years later, they may be in a bitter war. And you have to wonder, was there really love when they first fell in love with each other? Or was it something else? Maybe they just called it love. And what is love if 2 or 3 years later, not only there's no love, there's no interest, there's no care, there's even hate? So that's one question. What is love? On a practical level, people change. Everyone agrees with that. So as we change, and two people who know each other and they care about each other, their interests change. So one day, you may wake up and realize that the person that you cared about or you respected, there are other people now at work or at other places you meet that are more stimulating. Your interests change. You may have gotten bored. Maybe as a novelty, that person was for you. So why is it so inconceivable to think in terms that love is not forever? It's nice to believe it. I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate, obviously, so please don't leave before I finish my middle. You go away saying that I made a good case for no love forever after. But I'm making the case for very obvious reasons, because if we're going to talk about it, as I said, candidly, you have to address it head on. So why is it so inconceivable? I mean, you may fall in love with a book. You like the book, you love this book. You may even return to it over the years, but you're not going to only have one book in your life if you're a reader. You read other books. And same thing with music, and same thing with travel. So even if, of course, you can add into this equation that person you know, something that becomes common, you start losing the excitement, the passion. How could there still be passion of something that you're so familiar with? In the words of the Torah, there's an expression, tainuk tmidi ein tainuk. Any constant pleasure ceases to be pleasurable. Pleasure, by definition, has a certain novelty to it. And then, as I said, as our interests change, and as we age, and we mature, or immature, whatever you want to call it, but as we change, why is it inconceivable that two people who are changing, the two people who love each other, as they change, they grow out of each other, and now have different interests, and therefore different friends, and perhaps are interested now in someone else? This is not my argument, obviously, but it's a common argument, and it's also a logical one, especially considering everything I said before, which was that everything in this world goes through changes. So to truly answer the question, which is what I did there at the Learning Annex, we have to really look at what the word love is. Now, I just want to add one thing. The fact that many of us believe in it, love forever after, you can also, from the devil's advocate perspective, even though Jews don't believe in the devil, so let's put it from the ulterior argument, would be that people want to believe it. It sounds romantic. It sounds idealistic. It sounds beautiful. You may even have had someone in your life that was that way. So then definitely reinforces that it's not a fantasy, that's truly possible. I don't know how many have had, by raise of hands, how many of you saw a couple that you saw as love forever after? How many here? The same hands that rise by both of them? Maybe that's it. Maybe that's you got the science behind it. So one second. So this half the room and this half the room, that's how it's split up here? Was this intentional? So enough with the devil's advocate part. Let's go deeper into this topic. That will dissect it even further. What is it we look for in a partner? So of course everyone has their own taste, but in general terms, you could break it down into three types of compatibility, as they say. Well, I remember once there was a Shabbos singles workshop. After all the discussions, someone got up and asked, what about the clickability factor? You heard the clickability thing? So that's like, in addition to the compatibility, the clickability. So you could break down the compatibility of people into three obvious dimensions. One is physical compatibility. So two people physically attracted to each other. The fact is, some people are attracted to someone else is not attracted to that person. So it's clearly not so objective. Yes, are there certain features that humans have, they call beauties, or handsome people and so on, that many people are attracted to? That's absolutely true. But still, there's no such person that everyone's attracted to, or vice versa. Everyone has their somewhat of a subjective thing. But it is definitely a compatibility necessity. It's hard to imagine, if you're a healthy person, that you're going to want to continue seeing someone that you're repulsed by their looks, or by their physical appearance, or their vibe that they give off, or whatever it may be. So there's a physical attraction. You could throw into that sexual attraction, other elements, but it comes down to some type of physical manifestation. It's a look, it's body language, it's a way of demeanor, etc., etc. Then there's a second category, dimension, we can call emotional compatibility. You can be absolutely attracted to someone physically, but emotionally there's absolutely no click, no connection. Now, this happens very often. Now, there are people who look beautiful on paper or even in real life, and you talk to them, you don't feel anything. It's true that some people, if it's a physical attraction, they begin to feel things, but not necessarily is the case. So that's the second, emotional compatibility. And then there's a third dimension, which is intellectual compatibility, which means, in addition to the physical and the emotional, or not necessarily addition, but another element, is two people who respect each other's intelligence, stimulated by each other, sharing arguing even, in a good, healthy way. There's a stimulation. So you could have the first two, but not have the third. You can have emotional connection, but not necessarily be stimulated by the other person, or even respect their intelligence. Now, most people would say, if I had one out of these three, I'd be in good shape. 2 out of the 3 is almost perfect. 3 out of the 3 is absolute. What else can you expect? The fact of the matter is, as we'll see in a few moments, that's not the case at all. Not to dismiss or diminish the need for the first 3, or some of them. There's no question, even from the most spiritual Torah point of view, you find the expression that Rachel or Rebecca or Sarah were Yefas Toya, Yefas Mara. They were physically beautiful, or spiritually beautiful, but they definitely gave off a certain beauty. It wasn't just purely your souls connecting. So the Torah does not see beauty in any way, in any negative sense of the word. So physical beauty and emotional connection, intellectual compatibility are all, no question, critical components in a relationship. But they are not the forces that will create an eternal relationship. And here's what I submit. Why most people, and that's what I told them, and I say it here as well, most people would say, or anyone would say, you don't believe in love forever after, is because it's very true. Anything man-made cannot last forever. But let's say you add another dimension that's not man-made. And that's where there's a possibility for eternity. So if you talk about these 3, physical, emotional, and intellectual, these are subjective human connections. As I said, I'm not dismissing them. They're critical. because we're humans after all. But they are all changeable. Physical compatibility. Let's talk about the physical. So two people, let's say the most handsome couple you've met. 30, 40 years down the line, forget about 30, 40 years, even less than that. Age will begin to show on them. Though we hate this word, but there's a thing called wrinkles. So as much as you've tried to, and you can today with all kinds of methods, eliminate them, but there's some things you can't eliminate. And age, one way or other, will wear down a body. Whether it's physically apparent, whether it's apparent to others, only to you. And there's also, of course, the organs, internal ones, and there's the muscles, and there's the nerves, and things that not everything you can control, and definitely not forever. So if two people who are attracted to each other physically, it's very logical to say they may lose that attraction, which is what you hear so often from, especially from women, that, what does he need to have a 45-year-old woman? So he went off and ran off with his 20-year-old secretary, her husband, that is. Or had to find himself someone young. And if a man is honest, he may even admit it. He'd say, yeah, it's true. Obviously, he'll find some other reasons to make it not so superficial. But, and plenty of probably knowing his wife for years, he probably have a whole list of things why it wasn't compatible, blah, blah, blah. But the fact of the matter is, physical attraction is definitely subject to the changes and the vicissitudes of life. Simple as that. The same with emotional, the same with intellectual. Emotional, the same is true. You can be emotionally attached to someone, and then you could get bored with them as well. Then you meet someone else who emotionally excites you in a different way. This is possible, not only possible, it's common, and it's even logical. It should why would it not happen? Because we are, as I said, changing human beings. And the same thing with intellectual. Even if two people who can really communicate well and understand each other well, and enjoy the same books, or share ideas, etc., that doesn't necessarily mean that things won't change. You may meet another person. There's different levels of intellectual stimulation, and so on. So if you allow a relationship to be controlled by these factors, it is impossible, I would say, that it should not to go through changes. What you do about those changes is another thing. That doesn't mean that everything that changes, people divorce or will separate ways and lose love just because things change. People stay together for many reasons. One of them, the big one, is called the big C. It's called the convenience. Or as they say, the unknown evil is worse than the known evil. I know hundreds of people who told me that's why they remain in the relationship. And then there's the big C called the children. So convenience, children, there's a whole bunch of things that keep people together. So if there's a 50% divorce rate today, remember that's technical divorce. How many people are emotionally divorced? And just don't do it legally, for whatever reason. I always hate this joke, but I have to repeat it because it just fits so well, and it's it's one of those jokes you don't like to say, but it's like that joke about the 102-year-old guy and the 100-year-old woman who were married for 80 years. They come running to the rabbi. They must get a divorce. You're 102. They said we have a bright future ahead of us, and enough is enough. How many years were you married? 80 years. 80 years. You can't. You're able to deal with it. You can a few more years. No. Immediately. So why'd you wait till now? So they said, we waited for the children to die. This is one of the, as I said, the gallows humor of sad jokes, tragic jokes. As you can see why I was tempted to tell it, it's just simply my mischievous side. Even though at the same time I made a disclaimer that I don't really like the joke. So that way I can win on both ends. Have a good joke and then say it's not mine. I heard it from a bad comedian or something. It's a method. I did stand-up comic, by the way, in my life. Really. There was the Karbach Shul had the comedy club in New York. It was a stand-up in New York, one of those places. So Rabbi Sitra Naftali invited me, and he said they had one night they rented. I mean, not rented. They do these nights. So they have the professional comedians, and then they have. This was rabbis. So he asked me to come. So first I said, "You're crazy! I'm not coming." Humiliate myself like that for 5 minutes, and if you don't get any laughter, what do you do then, but then I felt it like a challenge. I called him back and said, you know what, I'll go for it. I have no clue what this was about. Trust me, it's not easy. Try it out, you'll see. So you get into this big comedy club, and you have like a lineup of comedians, maybe like 30 comedians, and they just like an assembly line, you know. And most of the rabbis, I must say, were you there that night? Mark, you were there, right? It was an interesting night, right? Okay, so you can confirm what I'm going to say now, right? So they had these few professionals who were good, and it's like a big crowd. I mean, I'm talking about 500 people. It's a big, big room, and then in the middle, you know, you get the butterflies in your stomach and all that. Yeah, I also get butterflies, I must tell you. So, and I said to myself, like, maybe I run out of time and I can go home, etc., etc. No, but they told me, okay, your time is coming. I was in the lineup, and there's glaring lights, and everybody's sitting there, and that's all you're doing. Is they only came to see you. There's no distractions. They have nothing else going on except you. So I got up there. I mean, and also I felt not just it wasn't about getting some laughs. I didn't want to do any cheap humor, and I also didn't want to do meaningless humor. So I wanted to tell something. I mean, I was trained to teach something when So how do you do that in 5 minutes with a bunch of jokes? So, under pressure, at least for me, under pressure, that's when I thrive. So I had no clue what I was going to say. I didn't even have anything prepared. Then, like 5 minutes, I knew I'm about to get on under the hot lights. So I remember. This is, by the way, this unrelated to the entire discussion here. So. I didn't use that one there. There was no discussion to be honest. So I got up there. I remember I memorized the last few minutes. I said, my best jokes about religion, about rabbis, and I decided I'm going to tell the story through a bunch of jokes, and with some type of message at the end of it, all through humor. And actually, it came out pretty good. Did you say, Mark? Right? Yeah. Okay. But I never did it again. Now I have this platform. I can sit here for an hour and carry on and throw in some jokes. It works. It doesn't work. But there was an interesting thing, and I was very happy I did it. So, because I was always trained, if you want to thrive, you want to grow, you have to put yourself in challenging situations. So, in case you're very overconfident in your communication skills, book yourself a night at a comedy club and get up on stage and tell me how it went. So it's not an easy thing to do. Should we put anybody on the spot right now? How do you want to how did I get to that? No, back to soulmates. There was that joke, right? The joke about the 102-year-old guy. So the fact is, then we have these three types of compatibility. Back on the serious note, the fact is that we have these three types of compatibility, and as I said, all of us who would not want to have these three seem to be like a perfect scenario. So it's true that they all go through changes, as I've been discussing, but nevertheless, I mean, what else is there? If you have physical, emotional, intellectual compatibility, what else is there? Okay, so there's that clickability thing I mentioned, whatever that means. So it could be you could have all those three, and then on paper it works, but it doesn't work. Fine. But those three seem to be a pretty good case. If you find someone that has those three things, and then if you feel that compatibility, would seem to be, as I said, almost a perfect match. But there's a fourth thing, and this is the one that we're not taught, and this is the one that we also don't come up with on our own, precisely because it's so important, and it's also, as you'll see, the only basis of eternal love. So I don't know when you raise your hands if this is what you meant, but maybe this is an explanation for what you aspire to. And you say you believe in love forever after. A foundation of a building is rarely seen by anybody. Have you ever seen a foundation? Sometimes they do some construction sites, and you don't even know it's a foundation. It's one of these things, looks like a concrete pit with a bunch of wires coming out of it, those pipes, and that becomes the foundation. And nevertheless, at the same time, the foundation of a building, without it, the building cannot stand. I mean, it can technically stand for a while, but it won't have that type of unwavering or eternal support. So what is the foundation of a match? There's a bracha we say, a blessing, that we use, that was used by many tzaddikim by using the Talmud. And you give a blessing to a couple who just got engaged. Well, one of the expressions used is that it should be a binyan adei ad. You ever hear that expression, binyan adei ad, which means an eternal edifice. Binyan in Hebrew is an edifice, a structure, a binyan, a building. And adei ad or ade means forever, and here's like really forever after. You say a structure forever after. You actually say ade ad twice. And it's a blessing that's given. So clearly, number one, it's an important blessing, or else you wouldn't say it. Number two, it's also something that needs a blessing. It means it doesn't happen automatically. So the question is, this foundation element of a relationship, what is it? Is it based on physical compatibility, emotional, or intellectual? You can hardly say that those can be foundational elements in a relationship, because they're all changing, as I said. How would you like to know that the foundation under your building is shifting? Not very secure. So it's true in places like San Francisco or other geographical locations that are built on faults. So they built today, after the San Francisco earthquake, architecture was changed, and they build foundations that have a certain flexibility, and they can move in case there is a tremor, etc., etc. But that's a unique situation. I don't think we want to go ahead and build relationships based on the possibility of an earthquake happening in your romantic life, exactly. But generally, a foundation, by definition, means that it has a... and actually, there's a lesson to be learned from that, too. I just realized. I'll get to it later. The foundation is something that, by definition, foundation means that you don't want it to be changing. Now, what is above the foundation, the building itself, that can change. You can add a floor. Or more importantly, even if you have the floors situated, you can furnish them. You can change design. Actually, the beauty of a great home is almost a paradoxical element. That on one hand, there is a foundational element that keeps it secure. On the other hand, they're always changing things. What kind of relationship would there be if there's no dynamic changes? So look at a good, healthy tree. A healthy tree consists of a trunk, which in a way is, I wouldn't say it's the trunk and the roots are the foundation, mostly the roots. And because they have healthy roots, a little poem here, a tree with healthy roots will bear healthy fruits. I like that. But precisely because it has deep roots, and it has that nurturing and the nourishment that the roots gather moisture and water to feed the tree grows and branches out and more, and it's a fruit tree, it's fruits, and every season it repeats itself. So you have here both. Take away the roots, someone will say, you know what, all I need are the fruits of the tree and the branches. What do I care about the roots? You chop off the roots, the rest will die as well. That's the paradox, as we shall discuss elaborate soon some more. That precisely the thing that is unwavering and a foundation element gives the power to be as flexible and as changing as possible. Take one away, the other one will also be affected. So what is the foundation when you say binyan adiyah, the foundational element? The physical, emotional, and intellectual are definitely vital, but they are more on the branch level. Branches, fruits, flowers, the elements, or the conscious elements that connect people together. What is the unconscious foundation that ultimately is the key to a soulmate? And I submit as well that those that don't believe in a soulmate is because they are unaware or have never experienced the unconscious dimension of a relationship. Because if you think it's the conscious dimensions between two people that keep them together, that's a big distortion. It's much deeper than that. It's unconscious elements, and you'll soon say they play with each other. They complement each other. So what is the fourth compatibility? Here it is. It's called spiritual compatibility. And this is an unconscious force, but it's not completely unconscious in the sense we cannot identify it. It's unconscious as like a foundation is. Once it's there, it's not that obvious. But without it, everything else falls. And definitely nothing can be eternal without it. So in simple English, what is this fourth compatibility? Is this: do you share a vision with the other person? A vision that transcends the changes, day-to-day changes of life. How do you want to build a home together? What kind of children do you want? When people come into your environment, what kind of feeling you want to give them? What legacy are you leaving? And these are some of the basic questions that are only possibly answered in the fourth dimension. In the first three, they're pieces of it perhaps, a glimpse here, a glimpse there, but they don't deal with this key element. So when two people, no matter what changes they go through in life, physical, emotional, intellectual, but visions don't change. your fundamental personality doesn't change, the essence of it. Your mission statement, so to speak, in life doesn't change. Two people find partnership on that level, then it's just a difference of how they play itself out. When they're 20 years old, it plays out one way. When they're 30, a different way. And when they're 80, a different way. Think of your relationship with yourself. You also go through many changes. But there's certain parts of you that never change. The things that you really, if you ever embrace ultimately your own personal mission in life, your calling, so to speak, a calling does not change. You may discover new dimensions of it. You may discover new ways it manifests. But a fundamental calling, the key talents that you have. A person that is an artist by nature, you don't suddenly become no longer an artist when you turn 50, 60, 70. It may be a way it manifests, a new way it expresses itself. But these things don't change. That's a foundational aspect to who you are. Now, could you discover new talents? Absolutely. Can you discover new dimensions of your foundation? Of course. I would say even more than that. I say most of us don't even know what our foundational personality is about. Because how would you know? How does a person really know what is the unwavering and unchanging element of their own being? It's either a few ways a person comes to it. A healthy home, an environment where you're nurtured, and self-confidence, and through self-confidence you're an environment with people that are secure, so you yourself are secure to discover yourself. Unfortunately, the antithesis to that is, think of an environment that's not secure. Parents that are insecure, that are fighting with each other, that don't know what they're good at, therefore they have to knock everybody else. People in identity crisis. I'm not even getting into more extreme dysfunctionality of abuse and other stuff that completely doesn't allow a person to emerge, a child into an adult. So in an unnurturing environment, very, very difficult to discover a calling. Because you're in a danger zone. You're running from a fire, which can be an unhealthy home. It's very difficult to find out who you are. You're busy running. Think if you had to run every day from a fire that's burning. God forbid. No time to think. No time to meditate. No time to ponder about yourself and life and so on. What is a healthy childhood? A healthy childhood, in the most so-called broadest sense of the word, is a child growing up in an environment provided for by healthy parents, where the child does not have to yet be thrown into a world that he or she has to support him or herself. In an environment where you're still protected from the elements, from somewhat of the cruelty of life. So you can develop the tools, the defenses, the skills, and when you do go out into this hostile, cruel world, you have something to work with. What happens if a child's life is aborted, meaning that you become an adult too quickly, whether it's due to a divorce, whether it's due to parents that are unhealthy, whether it's due to absenteeism, abuse. I mean, the list goes on. So basically, your growth has been aborted to some extent. I'm not saying this to depress anyone, it's just an analysis that you have to look at. Does that mean all is lost? No, but you have to know that something has to be compensated for. You must find a replacement for that, because if not, you will constantly be looking for that lost childhood, basically. For that love that you should have got. The saddest thing to me is, when I began giving this class years and years ago, eons ago, that's how long it is. I remember I thought I wasn't so naive. And then I discovered I was more naive than I thought, a lot more. I grew up in a home which was pretty much, I would say, insulated, in a good way, and I didn't really see what we call severe, or even not so severe, abuse. And when I began teaching and meeting people that did not grow up in my own home, I began hearing things that at first I thought was exaggerations. Not that I underestimated that people can be cruel or difficult or abusive, but when you haven't experienced it firsthand, you're almost incredulous when you hear certain things. I remember, and I just repeat it because it was the first time that really I was shaken, and I remember that it changed dramatically something inside of me. I guess in a good way, understanding sometimes the darkness of life. I don't know if it's good or not, but definitely more realistic. And I remember a guy came to this class years and years ago. He lives today in Israel. And he was like, I was then at the time maybe 25, 26. He was at least 35, 40. Came to speak to me privately. personally, privately, one-on-one in my office. And first of all, I felt uncomfortable. He's much older than I am. Much older than I am, and I'm coming to me for advice. But I remember what he shared with me. I just simply was stunned. I don't think I let on, but I could not believe it. He said to me, I have to tell you, I think these were his words, the first word. He says, I learned love from a dog. I first thought that was some joke, or somebody's trying to spring on me. And he said to me, my father was an alcoholic, and he used to come home in these rages, and then just violent, attack my mother, and I would often, as the oldest, protect her, and he literally with a baseball bat would beat me. And I would run out of the house. Sometimes I wouldn't even go home, and I would sleep in the garden near the kennel, and there's the dog that would soothe me. So I remember when I heard it, I was like, I didn't even know what was coming. I was sitting there, and first I thought to myself, this is like maybe something the matter with him, But then I realized it was absolutely true. I just remember this because this was like for me, it was the first time I heard something so radical. And then that was like nothing to what I heard later in my life. But I remember the moment because I lost my innocence, I must say, at that moment in a way. I mean, my innocence about what's possible. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. And, we became friends, and I don't know if I helped him, I guess, just talking about it, and I gave him a different perspective. And he says, I truly learned love. And I will find a woman that I will love. But not from my father and not from my mother, who was like this enabler and equally unhealthy. I found that the dog helped me discover it. This dog would just keep me nurtured. So if you don't hear it yourself, you think it's like off the wall, something the matter. I mean, some of you probably this is not surprising to. Some of you may be just as shocked as I was then. The point I'm making here is not so much so relevant to the particular discussion tonight, but it just tells you the extremes of what people can be growing up in homes. And sometimes you need the eclipse of the sun to appreciate sunlight. I learned from people like that, and I've shared this with people like that. Not that God forbid that they should have to be the teachers. I wish they didn't have to go through this. It's, I think, maybe the most horrible thing in life to see, tragic thing to see children whose lives are aborted. When you see the children of the Holocaust, or children in private Holocaust today, personal ones. It's because children are innocent. They definitely cannot be blamed. I'm not suggesting that an adult deserves to be hurt. No one deserves to be hurt. But a child, it's absolutely, if not a child, then where's our last vestige of hope in purity? So when you see children like that, it's unbelievable to me. But the contrast, the thing you learn from that is, when you see something deprived, you understand the importance of when you have it. So I count my blessings, obviously, and I obviously ever since appreciated it. Because, health doesn't feel like anything. You grow up in a healthy environment, it doesn't feel like anything. That's why it's healthy. Like if someone asks you, what does health feel like? What does it feel like to be healthy? If you start describing what it feels like, that's a pretty good sign that it's not so good. If you describe it, it feels it feels dull, or it feels sharp, or it feels like it's squeezing you here or it's pushing you there. That's not good. A pressure here. When you start feeling things, that means there's something wrong. So when you grow up in a healthy environment, there's a certain taking for granted because it's just flowing smoothly. You don't expect otherwise. But what you learn from that is that the importance you talk about, I said about love before. These are foundational. I'm going back to why it is so difficult sometimes to discover your own foundational personality. So what happens? You grow older, and being human beings, we all have our talents, we have our skills. You go to school, and you learn about a lot of things. Sometimes you may discover something that you're really good at. Even something powerful like being an artist, or for that matter, actually everybody in some way is an artist. It depends. Some people are artists in business, and some are artists in art. But you learn different skills. And then we're thrown into the world. Our schools don't really necessarily focus on discovering what your soul is like. So you're thrown into the world, and by the time you're already in the world, you have to now make a living. You have to pay bills. You have responsibilities. And then there's, of course, our own sexuality, where most of us are thrown into it long before we're really ready for it, due to whatever the way society works today, peer pressure, and just our own needs and our own hormones, etc. So it's not surprising that we're in a world where we're working on the level of the branches and the fruits and the physical, emotional, intellectual compatibility, and the foundational part, which is the vision that you are about and what you should be sharing with someone, has been neglected. So what do? Now you're smack in the middle of it all. You're an adult. You're already in need of a relationship. You've probably been in one or more than one, some healthy, not so healthy. And what is your foundation? Can you stop your life and go back to your childhood and suddenly say, you know what, I'm going to build this thing from scratch? That's not possible. We can't turn the clock back. Our personalities are no longer child personalities. We may have the inner child, as they say, but there's still an element that you've now grown into an adult. And as I said before, even if you had the money, all the money in the world, where you don't have to work, and there's no pressures on you, what do you do next? So what do? You are a functioning adult, or not so functioning, whatever you want to call it. Adult, maneuvering, managing, etc., etc. So the first thing is, as the wise sages say, Yedias hamachla is chetzi refuah. Knowing an illness is half the cure. Even if we are not fully developed our so-called foundational, visionary, spiritual compatible element in our own souls, knowing that, and knowing that that's what's needed, is already halfway there. And it's interesting, they say halfway. It's a pretty strong statement. To say knowledge of illness, or of knowing your deficiency, is half the cure. You know, if you said it was 10%, 20%, but half is a strong statement. It is half. The statement is half. Why? Because it's not because per se half of it is cured, but you have a big head start if you're aware. Because then it's a question of now filling that gap. And I can tell you from my personal experiences, the biggest challenge is creating that awareness. After that, it's almost automatic. The rest will heal itself. Creating that awareness to show somebody, to help somebody see in their own lives what is lacking, is far, far harder than to fill that void once they know it. Because if you don't know it, what you're doing is, whether you know it or not, you're consciously and unconsciously creating all kinds of you're contributing to the illness perpetuating itself. You know, and that's not because we're malicious or we're self-destructive. It's just the nature of the beast. You become your own worst enemy. And this is not intentional. If it's intentional, it's another, you call it something else. There's a name for it in psychology. If it's unintentional, means that you go about your life, you think everything is going fine, but there's a void inside of you that you have not identified yet, and it's causing you to make decisions all the time. Because voids make decisions. There's no question about it. When there's a hunger, it's going to express itself somewhere. So if you know you're hungry, and you know what you're hungry for, that's why it's half the cure. Because now the question is, I know what it is, now I have to go find it. So I've seen people have their lives away, as Leonard Cohen sings, looking for a miracle, or looking for something, but they don't even know what it is that they're really hungry for. So discussing, just purely discussing, this fourth level of compatibility that I'm describing tonight, spiritual compatibility, the more you know about it, even if you don't have access to it immediately, that is the key to opening up the door to finding it. Now remember, another trap is this, especially when it comes to emotional relationships, or relationships which are emotional, I should say, is that we don't have patience. We don't have patience. You want something fixed now. Now, sometimes God blesses you and you can do it that way, but sometimes it's what's called the long, short road. There's a short, long road and there's a long, short road. You know the difference? Sounds the same, right? Well, there's a story in the Talmud that goes like this. A guy was traveling on a road, and he came to a fork in the road. He was on the way to Jerusalem. So one of the Jerusalem kids, who were known for their wit, he asked the kid, so which way to Jerusalem? So if it was Yogi Berra, he'd say, you come to the fork in the road, take it. But that's not the Talmud's answer. The Talmud says, so the little kid says to the traveler, he says, well, this is the long, short road, and this is the short, long road. And he scampers off. So the traveler is left with this riddle. What's the long, short? Sounds to him, short, long sounds shorter than long, short. Okay, so he takes the short, long road. And he sees Jerusalem right up ahead, yeah, right there, he sees it. Beautiful city. Problem is that he encounters all this, what do they call it, overgrowth or undergrowth, whatever. There's thorns and trees, and it was impossible to make through. All day he spends, hours. He sees Jerusalem, but he can't get through because the road is all overgrown with thorns and all the branches and so on. So he goes back and takes the second road, which is called the long, short road. And this road, he doesn't see Jerusalem, not 1 mile, not 2 miles. It's a much longer road. But there's nothing blocking him. It's a long road, and he finally reaches the city. So one was just maybe a few yards away, or a few miles away, and this other was many more. But this was long, short, this was short, long. Now in life, there are problems that can be resolved in the short, long way. Well, let's put it this in a short way. Short-term solutions, they call, which is symptomatic based. You have a cut, you put on a Band-Aid. You have a headache, you take a painkiller. But then there are long-term problems. And long-term problems can never be solved with short-term solutions. You can buy time. You can subside the pain. You can, but you're never going to solve a long-term problem with a short-term solution. It's just unscientific. It doesn't work that way. So, if you can resolve something short-term, great. That means maybe it was only a short-term problem and there had nothing deeper going on. But if, God forbid, a pain continues in your life, and short-term solutions don't, that's a sign there's something deeper going on. You cannot rely on the short-term. But our tendency, even then, is we still want the short, long road. We want the short road. We don't want the long one. So when it comes to relationships, as I said, there's a lot to do with, I would say, our attitude. I think if a person's attitude becomes healthier, so God usually provides more. Well, as I said earlier, you may be sitting near your soulmate right now. Don't look around. That's not what I meant, and you may not know it because you have your own things to work through. And sometimes when we say mazel, mazel, good luck or something like that, mazel also needs to have something to rest upon. If you're looking for a job and you stay in your basement and you don't go out to network or meet people or advertise yourself, the mazel may be in the street, but you're not going for it. So mazel also requires some type of effort. So the effort that is necessary is, as I said, number one is to identify this dimension. The physical, emotional, intellectual compatibility, you don't need me to help you with. Everybody has got their interests. But if you want to really look for that final element, final fourth dimension, called the soul dimension. And by soul, I do not mean per se religion or how many mitzvahs a person does. As a matter of fact, I remember that someone came to this class. I think I mentioned this a few weeks ago, and they were dating. One person was dating. I think I mentioned last week. Two people were dating each other. They were both here, and the woman told me, she doesn't think the guy is religious enough. Doesn't keep Shabbos yet. She does keep Shabbos, eat kosher, and so on. And I told her what I was taught was that when it comes to shidduchim, when it comes to relationships, there's no two people that are exactly in the same place. That's impossible. Even we are never in the same place from one day to the next, let alone two people. What you're looking for is that two people are going in the same direction. So you may be here, I told this woman, as far as observing goes, and he may be here. The key thing is that you shouldn't be going like that. So you may be very frum or religious right now, but you're going this way. And he may be very not, but he's going this way. That's the key. And this is not just about observance, it's about almost all issues, because some people, it's just a question of really the journey that we're on. You look for a partner that is on a journey with you, not a partner who is in the same spot as you are. Usually those of us that look for someone that's exactly like ourselves, I have to say, whether you like it or not, it's a sign of insecurity. You need someone exactly like where you are. What does that mean? Is that maybe that person has something to teach you too? Maybe you should be exactly where they are. But that wouldn't be healthy either. You have to be where you are. And then you find that the other person is going in the direction, or more or less in the direction, and you both can teach each other, and you both have the humility to journey together. That's what it is. It's about a journey. So to go back to this, the key is to identify this fourth dimension. And when you do, and when you understand what it means, you'll understand what a soulmate means. So what is a soulmate in this context? The word soul is the hard word to understand. What is soulmate? There's a body mate, there's a soulmate. What's a soulmate? So the way I would define a soul is, remember that if you have no relationship with your own soul, is it possible for you to discover your soulmate? So one person once answered me when I asked this question. They said, "Yeah, I haven't found my soul, but if I find someone else who doesn't touch with their soul, they'll help me find my soul." That's a big mistake. No one's going to help you find your soul. I mean, maybe a teacher or a mentor or a book or a song, but a partner in life. And this is one of the big problems. People are looking for that to fill that void of what your soul should be experiencing through another person, which already creates a whole imbalance. Like, who's in charge here? Soulmate, by definition, mean that there are two souls. Each have a very unique personality. They don't have to be completely in touch with themselves, but somewhat. And now they begin this adventure called life, called a relationship, where two souls are interacting, and maybe they're helping each other discover what a soul means. So yes, if you were looking for someone who, if two people find, and they both are interested in this soul journey, then you're talking about the beginnings of a relationship that's on a soul level. If it's about the other three compatibilities, they're all very nice, but they're not about souls, and they're not about the foundation elements. Now you could say, well, we grew up in a society where the focus is on externals. Beauty matters a lot, class, money, of course emotional, intellectual abilities and so on, relationships, or some people call sexual prowess and knowledge and experience. This is a society that has created a standard, whether we like it or not. Many will say, this is what I grew up with. Maybe we're programmed. Well, I can tell you, if you want to continue your life and say, I'm a victim to what society has provided for me, then you're going to get what society offers you. And that is, the statistics show, you'll not find a long-term relationship. If you want to discover soul, you're going to have to somewhat break the social programming of our society. There's no real two ways around that. And people don't like to hear this, but you want to be blunt, that's what it comes down to. This doesn't mean that you have to become a hermit and lose your social aesthetics and be disconnected from the life of a, we'll call it a sensual world. On the contrary, it just means you can't be trapped by it. You can't be a slave to it. There's no question, in Judaism, this isn't about, a relationship is not just about some type of spiritual experience at the expense of. Some people have that attitude at the expense. I don't care what the physical is like, I don't care everything else, it doesn't even matter if I can talk to my spouse. That's not true at all. And here's the distortion comes from at the end of Eshes Chayil, when we sing it or say it Friday night, which itself is a very powerful prayer, and it's actually from Proverbs, Mishlei. So one of the last lines is Sheker Achein veHevel Hayofi. The expression is that Sheker, false, is grace, and Hevel Yofi, and empty is beauty. And then it continues, Ki'im, the true thing we honor, the true thing we praise, is a woman of valor, a woman who has awe of God. Now, everybody, when you read it literally, it says, it's a dismissal of chen and of yofi, of beauty and of grace, which in itself is somewhat of a contradiction. I mentioned earlier, the Torah is full of people. It says, Noach motza chen be'enei Hashem. Noach found chen in the eyes of God. Throughout the Torah, you say the person Yosef had chen, he had grace. It's not at all a dismissed concept. Throughout the entire Torah, chen is one of the most beautiful virtues. A person who has charm, a person who's charismatic. And the same thing with yofi, beauty. Torah does not dismiss beauty. Everywhere you find, I said before, Yefas Teir, Yefas Mara, Moses, the different people the Torah described that had a beautiful face or a beautiful, and this is not just talking about spiritual beauty, it's talking about physical beauty. As a matter of fact, there's a law in the Torah that when you build a synagogue, you write a Torah scroll, you write a mezuzah, it should be done on beautiful parchment with beautiful handwriting. Literally, not just again spiritual. You could say, who cares? A mezuzah, the main thing is its spiritual value. The main thing is that the letter should be written right. It's Torah. But it says, Zeh Keli V'Anvehu, the Torah is a verse that says that this is God and you shall you shall beautify him. So the Talmud learns, from this we learn that when you do a mitzvah, it should be done with physical beauty too. The environment should be beautiful. The temple that was built on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem was a beautiful structure, physically, architecturally. So aesthetics and physical beauty in this world, from a Torah point of view, is actually a reflection of spiritual beauty. So what is this verse saying? That it's sheker and hevel, that it's false and empty. So the answer is also obvious, but I'll explain it. It's saying, if it's only that, if the only thing you have is charm and beauty, and there's nothing behind it, then you can also create it is false. It is false. Picasso said that art is the greatest lie that reveals a deeper truth. This is an artist speaking. What is he saying? That when you look at art per se, what is art? Art doesn't depict reality. Nothing in this world is static. A piece of art is static. It depicts us as a state of being that's not static. A face, a horizon, a flower, abstraction, whatever. It elicits movement, but it itself physically is a static object hanging on your wall. Because on its own, if you think of it on its own, like that story, what's the joke go? That this woman was pushing her carriage with a newborn baby. And a guy comes over and looks at the baby. What a beautiful baby. And the mother says, with such nachas, with such pride, she kfeld, as they say. She says, oh, you should see the picture. You know? I wonder what kind of child that grew up from that, you know? She's talking about a real life child. She says, that's nothing. You should see the picture that was taken of the child, that is. So, yes, if beauty becomes solely driven by the physical external, then it is empty and false. So it's about a body and a soul. In Jewish thought, the key is to have, and this is also relevant to relationship, is a person who is beautiful inside and outside. Is it true that we can be seduced by the outside? Yes, we live in a world that is superficial, that seduces our senses all the time. So that's why we're also trained, we also have a soul within. And just like you don't want to just be seen as a person that's purely superficial by your externals, you have an inside and a personality, you would assume that other people want to be respected the same way. So we live in a world where we are trapped in that world. You know, some say men are trapped by it more than women. To be debated or not, but there's that so-called theory. But regardless, that's what the verse is saying. So you talk about this fourth level of compatibility. Until you don't discuss that, I must say, you may find your soulmate anyway, because God can be nice and compassionate. But let's put it this way, it's not necessarily due to your efforts. If you're trying to find a shidduch and finding it difficult, or you're looking to do something new, my advice, simple advice, but it's not so simple, is you have to think differently. You know, Apple computers came up with think different, but the fact of the matter is, it comes long before modern culture. As I like to put it, when people ask me, they want to change their lives, I always say, so, you know, if you think what you thought, and you say what you said, and you do what you did, what do you think you're going to have? What's the result? You're going to have what you had. And say, yeah, that's right, that's true. Now that explains everything. But the fact of the matter is, we all want to have something different, but we think the way we thought yesterday, and we do what we did yesterday, and we speak what we spoke yesterday. So exactly, where exactly is this new result going to come from? Some outside mysterious force is suddenly going to bring to you a new development? If you're thinking in the box that you were trained to think, and the other and speaking and doing the same, where's change going to come from? In the healing world, they call it, if nothing changes, nothing changes. Meaning, if you do nothing to change, nothing's going to change. Action and reaction. So to define a little deeper the spiritual dimension, and this I go back now to the chapter where Rebecca meets Isaac. So there's one verse, it's a very powerful verse. So it says that when Rebecca and Isaac saw each other, so there's a story where Rebecca covers her face, which is why we cover the Badekin by a chuppah. It originates from this chapter. But then there's another verse that goes like this. Literally, that they both go into the tent of Sarah.